Representing the Government of India and the Embassy here in Washington, we're very glad to have with us today Ambassador Raminder Jassal, Deputy Chief of Mission. Ambassador Jassal has had quite a distinguished career in his nation's foreign service. It would take me way too long to go through all that you've done in your career since 1976. But in terms of recent highlights, Ambassador Jassal became DCM in Washington in January 2005. He served as India's ambassador to Israel, 2001 to 2004. And from 1999 to 2001, he was the official spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs. He's held posts elsewhere abroad, elsewhere in the External Affairs Ministry and at the Ministry of Defense. Again, his CV being too long to go through all of it, I hope it will suffice to mention some of the at least most recent distinguished accomplishments. Ambassador Jassal, thank you for joining us today. I turn the podium over to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to extend to the Heritage Foundation, particularly Dr. Fulner, and to Fiki and to everyone else here, greetings from Ambassador Ronen Sen, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here today because he's indisposed. So I'm happy to substitute for him. And well, you have the additional compensation of having a person with a turban instead of one without one. So I would like to just briefly begin on, I'll share some thoughts with you about the India-US relationship as far as the road ahead is concerned. But first of all, I'd like to recognize the presence of Secretary U.S Bajpai, our former ambassador to the United States. And it's particularly scary for me to be speaking in front of an audience in which he himself is present. But I'd like to just share some thoughts with you based on what has really happened and some personal connection with the India-US relationship since the early 1980s, when Ambassador Vajpayee was the ambassador here in the time of President Reagan. You know, for a tribe of people, diplomats, to which I also belong, who are supposed to have a great ability to use and spin words, it's amazing how short they run and how quickly they run out of words when it comes to describing relationships. One of the most misused terms is strategic. You'll find that even in a situation where there's an episodic overlap of interest or an episodic relevance, there's always a temptation for diplomats to use the word strategic. And sometimes it gives the word a bad name. But if you look at strategic from the point of view of a relationship with a long-term vision, with long-term interests that are involved, and something that is based on a very broad convergence, I think the word strategic truly fits the India-US partnership today. If you look at just what's happened in the last 2 years, I agree with Dr. Fulner when he said that while a lot of attention has been placed on the civil nuclear deal, civil nuclear initiative, mainly because of its novelty and because it broke with 30 years of thinking, there's a large number of accomplishments across a whole spectrum of issues that have characterized the India-US partnership. Just look at the last 2 years. We have an Open Skies Agreement which was signed in April. That was following Secretary Rice's visit to India in March of 2005, an Open Skies Agreement. In May 2005, we started an energy dialogue, again encompassing clean coal, as something that's imperative for India and the United States given our energy profiles, with clean coal, oil and gas, civil nuclear, renewables, etc. We started an economic dialogue, which is not just a dialogue between governments, but also incorporates the top CEOs from both countries. In June 2005, we signed a new defense framework agreement. For the first time in the history of India and the United States, we have a defense agreement, a framework agreement, which defines common security interests of the two countries, how we are going to further those interests, and also defines the mechanism for bilateral interaction. In July 2005, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, I think, had one of the most remarkable and successful visits of an Indian Prime Minister to the United States ever. And we launched at that time the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Cooperation Initiative, the Knowledge Initiative on Agriculture, and a host of other things that you would have seen in the documents of that time. In October 2005, we signed a new science and technology agreement. In March, when President Bush visited India, there was another slew of initiatives that were taken, including a new bilateral commission on science and technology, etc. If you look at the history of what has been accomplished in 2 years, you get a sense of what lies ahead. And I don't think that this has been like a magician's trick of something being conjured out of a hat. There is a basis, there is a foundation for what has happened, because there is a broad convergence of interest. I'm not going into the 1950s and 60s and what has happened in the past, because those years were not bereft of important accomplishments in bilateral India-US ties. The setting up of the IITs in India, in the 60s, the Green Revolution, the involvement of US land-grant universities, people like the scientists like Borlaug, who revolutionized agriculture in India. And then in the 80s, the MOU on science and technology, the beginnings of a defense partnership with the visits of Secretary Weinberger and Carlucci to India, etc., etc. There is a long basis, history, and there is a foundation for what we are trying to accomplish. Even on the civil nuclear side, which has also provoked a debate on non-proliferation and disarmament issues, sometimes it has been projected as if India has been in a kind of having a lonely path it has tread over all these years on this particular issue. And I think that is somewhat misplaced. From the time of Pandit Nehru's speech in the Indian Parliament in 1948, when he introduced the Indian Atomic Energy Act, the 1956, his proposal for a standstill agreement on nuclear tests, India's participation, India's signature to the Partial Test Ban Treaty, after the Chinese nuclear tests, our approach to the other nuclear powers for security guarantees, which didn't come, India's membership of the Biological Weapons Convention, India's membership of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and having fulfilled its obligations under that, which is even international inspections and destruction of some stocks. So India has been part of the non-proliferation and disarmament mainstream all the time, and part of the consensus. It's only on the non-proliferation treaty that India has stayed out of. But while doing so, has implemented non-proliferation treaty plus kind of controls in what we deem to be our own very national interest. So it's not as if India is coming into any mainstream. It's not that there is a sudden discovery of this important objective. India has been part of the international consensus, a part of the international non-proliferation regime right from the beginning. As we look at the future, I think the reason why it is bright and why the road ahead is bright is because, as I said, there is a broad convergence of India-US interests. Whether the way we handle tsunami, the way we are having common objectives in Afghanistan, or the way we've been looking at and trying to manage regional problems, there is a very broad convergence on the economic, defense, security, and all other aspects of life. A lot has been said about shared values between India and the United States. I think that also translates into something very practical, which is that shared values means democracy. And democracy begets transparency and predictability. There will be countries about which you can never be sure what are the decisions, what are the choices they will make 7 years from now. In the case of India, being a democracy and having been one since 1947, there is a case of transparency, predictability, and a regulatory mechanism that I think inspires confidence in close partners such as the United States. I'm not going to talk at any length about India's economic strength. These are all the issues that are going to be taken up, and the broad compatibility and complementarity of Indian and US business and economic interests, as well as those in the areas of science and technology and space cooperation. So we have the road ahead is bright to my mind because there is a history and there is a broad convergence today. And when you look at the horizon, given this background and the imperatives of the national interests of both countries, I think the road ahead is bright, and we all need to work and build on that basis. Thank you very much.
Networks and to expand our alliances. Nick, I look forward to hearing your assessment of U.S.-India relations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ambassador Nick Burns.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim. Good morning to everyone. I'm pleased to join this conference, and I want to thank Heritage and Ed Fulner for the invitation to be here. Thank my colleague, my former colleague, Kim Holmes, for the pleasure of that very nice introduction, and to thank all of you for listening to me. I know you're here to talk about the future of the U.S.-India relationship. That's very much on our mind. Yeah, I think it's on the mind of Raminder Jassal and of the Indian government. I thank Raminder. Ambassador, I thank you for being here. It's great to see so many friends of the United States from the Indian side. And I hope to say a few words about how we view the present and future of the relationship between our two countries, and then I'll be happy to engage in conversation with you. I was thinking about the opportunity to discuss U.S.-India relations with you today. When I was planning my talk, I recalled the title of a book written by the former CEO of Procter & Gamble in India, Gurcharan Das. He wrote a sweeping economic history of India from independence to our present time entitled India Unbound. I know a lot of you have heard of that. He describes in that book one of the most extraordinary international stories of the late 20th century, and that's India's evolution from a socialist, state-planned economy to essentially a free market and vibrant free market economy. And that transformation has brought about, with the leadership of Prime Minister Singh in various positions of government and with the dynamism of India's private sector, it's brought this extraordinary and remarkable growth in the Indian economy, its emergence as a rising power in the world today. Within the first quarter of this century, so just in a few years, India will become one of the 5 largest global economies. It is now an undisputed global technology leader. Anyone who's been to Bangalore or Hyderabad recently, as I have, will attest to that. India will soon be the world's most populous country, as you know. It has a very large, very skillful, and youthful workforce. It's going to continue to possess larger and ever more sophisticated military technology that will serve it well and serve our partnership with India well. And it is a democratic country that is a symbol of what democracy should be in its own region. And that's a useful signal to Bangladesh, to Nepal, and to Sri Lanka, as well as to countries throughout Asia. So I think that the United States has, emerging with India, a major relationship, one of partnership and strategic value in the years ahead. President Clinton recognized this 10 years ago. President Bush has recognized this since he took office in 2001. Both of them have been responsible for building a fundamentally different U.S.-India relationship than any we've had with India since partition. We once had a somewhat adversarial relationship. We were in different camps during the Cold War. We now have a very cooperative one. I was talking to Secretary Rice the other day about the fact that we've never had the degree of involvement with India in trying to resolve the regional crises in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal that we've had over the last year. We haven't had the degree of global political and strategic cooperation that we've had with India over the last several years. And so I think this partnership rests on a very solid foundation, not just of democratic values, but of converging geostrategic interests between the two countries. And I believe that this partnership will be, for the 21st century, one of the most important partnerships that our country, the United States, has with any country around the world. And I would wager that in 20 or 30 years' time, most Americans will say that India is one of our 2 or 3 most important partners worldwide. That is important for our country as we seek to expand our own influence and protect our own interests in South Asia, but also in East Asia as well. We're also witnessing an explosion of ties on the people-to-people basis. And for those of us who are practitioners of diplomacy and are responsible for maintaining the health and welfare of any bilateral relationship,